This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, thank you very much. So today we are going to discuss about the Kubernetes security part. And in Kubernetes security part, we have a couple of topics to be covered. One is RBAC. Another one is we have to cover network security. And then we have to discuss about the config maps and security context. So these are the four topics that we are going to discuss today. We'll see that how much we will be able to cover. We will try to cover up all the points. Okay, so what comes in our mind when we say that Kubernetes security? So Kubernetes security is something which is very critical part because a lot of applications are getting deployed inside the cluster, and there is only one way by which you are accessing the Kubernetes cluster, and that is through API server. So think about this situation. Let me draw a small diagram to explain this concept. Uh, Consider this is your Kubernetes cluster, right? And inside that we have worker nodes, and all of them master nodes are there, worker nodes are there. And in the master node there is one important entity which is called as API server, right? And you have inside couple of worker nodes, guys. Here, this is your worker one, and there is another. You can see there are a couple of worker nodes are there. It can be more also. It can be 3, 4, 500, or maybe more than that. Okay, now if you want to access or if you want to instruct anything to this Kubernetes cluster, you need to, as a user, if you are a user here, right? And if you want to instruct something to this cluster, you need to access this cluster, right? First of all, and if you want to access the cluster, how you are going to access the cluster? Only through this API server. As an administrator or as a developer, you will be able to access this particular server, Kubernetes cluster, through this API server only. There is no other way. Once the cluster is accessed, once you have deployed the application, once you create the service, then the customers will be able to access it from this side. That is a service through the service. But today, that we will be discussing about later on how we can make it HTTPS or SSL certificate that we can apply to the service to access it. However, if I want to access the cluster from the user side, how do we access it? This is important part. This cluster might be available on my Azure environment, or it might be on the AWS, or it might be in my on-premises data center as well. So if that API server has to be accessed, then this API server's IP address, whatever the master server's IP address is there, okay, or its context, whatever the context is set, that context should be accessible from the user's machine. It can be laptop, it can be Windows machine, it can be Linux machine, anything. Most of the time we are accessing the API server through master server itself, because we are logging to the master server, and from the master server you are able to log in. Okay, so by using root user ID, I am doing it. You can use any user ID to access that particular master server worker cluster through API server. So what is the stuff required to access from the user side? You need to have the IP address of the cluster. That is one thing, and that should be that should be accessible from your laptop machine. That is the first thing, important thing. Otherwise, you will not be able to do anything. IP address of cluster. Okay, then what else is required? You required a username, right, to be accessed, such as kubadm is our admin user, kubadm admin. I will be showing you this one, guys. This is our main user through which we are accessing it. Third thing is required is that you should have the server keys, that is called as a certificate. And fourth is you should have a client keys also. So if you want to access this Kubernetes cluster from any other machine, from any other user, you need to have this information stored inside the user's laptop or user's client, in short, client machine. But in which file this information will be stored on the laptop or maybe a client machine? You might be remembering that we always copy one command. We use command cp etc kubernetes admin.conf. This is a configuration file inside the home directory of the user, like this one, .q folder, and inside that we create a file called as a config. Why do we do this? We do this one because this file contains, this admin configuration file contains all this information, right? And we want to bring that into the home directory of the user by which you are going to access the cluster. And that is why this step is there. If you don't use this step, then you will not be able to access to the API server, right? So the information about the Kubernetes cluster, information about the IP address, users, which has been created inside the Kubernetes cluster, its keys and its client keys, everything is stored inside this file called as admin.conf, and that we copy inside the config file. And because of that, we are able to access to the server. Once we get inside the server, then what is the authorization? This is nothing but authentication. You are authenticated to enter into the cluster. But the second important step comes in this cluster, that once you are logged in, whatever the username you have specified inside this admin config file, is that user have appropriate permission on the resources inside the cluster, and that permissions, that roles, that authorize, altogether it is called as authorization on the resources inside the cluster is the another important step. So first thing is that authentication, second thing is that authorization, and third important thing is need to be understood that to plug in this authentication and authorization, there is certainly definitely there is a models which are used. That models or plugins are called as admission control, admission controller or admission control. So what is the meaning of that? If anybody knows about the Linux operating system, all right, so always we enter the user ID and then we enter the password, right guys? User ID and password, and then this user ID and password is given to one model, admission one model, and that model goes to the backend where the passwords are stored. Let's say etc shadow file and etc password file. So whenever you are trying to give the user ID and password, that user ID and password will be collected by some model, and that model will go in the backend where your passwords are stored. It will cross check whether the passwords are correct or not, right? And if that password is correct, then only you will get authentication. The model which does that job of carrying the user ID and password from the console towards the database and cross-checking it, and again giving the acknowledgement back to the console that your user ID and password is good or bad, that model is nothing but an admission control. And one of the model which is used for the authentication mechanism is called as a PAM. So it is a very interesting model which is available in the Linux. So in the Kubernetes cluster, this kind of models are called as an admission controller. So API server does three important checks when any user is accessing your cluster, and one of them is authentication, another one is authorization, and third one is admission control. So authentication is nothing but checking up whether the user ID and password provided by the client is correct or not. Sometimes we don't use the user ID and password, we use the keys, right? We use the certificates, we use the tokens, right? So we check whether all the tokens, all the certificates which are passed by the user are correct or not. Once they are correct, they are authentic, then the user will be authenticated. And once it is authenticated, who does that job of authentication? Kind of a admission control. There is a model inside it. And what is authorization? Authorization is nothing but what are the roles, what are the permissions given to that user on the resources inside the clusters. So once the authentication is done, then actually that user will be able to perform some activities on the resources which are inside that cluster. So let me show you first of all this admin.conf file, and then we'll move ahead, right? Then I will show you that what is the meaning of role binding, subjects, and everything. So first of all, understand this important configuration, guys. So let me go to my master node, and in the master node you can see here kubectl gate nodes. I have a couple of nodes here. That's fine. Now, but where is my configuration file stored? So you see, I have logged in with the user called as a root. You can check with the command called as ID. So I have logged in with the root, and what is its home directory? You can check that by using a command called as echo $home, and you see that home directory of the user is root. So let me go to that directory, and inside that directory you will find cd.cube folder, right? So this is, we have created a folder. When we have created this folder, while installation of the Kubernetes cluster, once cluster is deployed, there are three commands are there, like mkdir, chown command, and cp command is there. So that time you have created this .q folder. I hope that you remember it, right? So let me show you that also. So kubeadm installation, this is my file. And do you remember this couple of commands? Cp etc kubernetes to this one. Then we change the ownership of it. Right? These are the commands we have fired after we use this command, kubeadm init command. Then we do fire this command and then we join it, right? So that time you have created this particular directory called as .q. Right, and what it contains, guys, it contains very important file called as a config file. And if I remove this file from this place, what will happen? Let me remove this file config to some other location. Let's say I'm moving this into some other location called as a home. Do I have this config file? No, I don't have right now. So the user by which we are trying to access the Kubernetes cluster, right? Now we don't have the configuration file of the Kubernetes cluster. And if you try to fire this command, kubectl get nodes, guys, you will get this error. No configuration has been provided. Try setting Kubernetes master environment variable. Right, so you can see here again. Let me try out kubectl get nodes, and you see this is the error coming up. So if I delete this .q folder also, okay, let me delete this one .q. I will not be able to access this one. There is no environmental parameters, or you may get some error, 8080 error we'll get, right? So where is my main configuration file of the Kubernetes cluster? So it is always there in the etc Kubernetes folder, and you can find out there is a file called as admin.conf. For the production server, please underline the statement what I am saying. In the production server, you should never keep admin.conf file in the master server. Never ever, in case you have on-premises setup. If somebody accesses this particular server by any chance, then if they get this admin.conf file, then your entire cluster will get compromised. So it is very important, once you configure the kube.conf file somewhere with some other name, then delete this one, or take a backup at appropriate place and then delete it. So administrative rights, this is having all administrative right, because it contains what it contains. It contains the the user who has all rights, that is a Kubernetes admin. This is the main user of the by which we are accessing the Kubernetes cluster, right? And we should never allow this user to access the we should never allow the cluster to be accessed by using this user. This should be kept confidential like tail keys. Do you know, earlier in the earlier place we used to have the tail keys. Similarly, we should keep this particular file at very safe place and then create the users, right, and assign them a roles and then put these users, like let's say that I want to create a user called as, let's say, user one. Okay, another developer I have that is called as a Dave, Jeans. I have different name of the employees in my team. So create the users by their name, assign that users inside this particular configuration file, and do not you and give them a proper roles so that they will only perform the task which they need to perform, and do not keep this Kubernetes administrator file in the master server. So this is very important, guys, as well as at the client side. Never ever access your Kubernetes cluster by using the administration. Now, by using a admin right user, right? Another important thing that you see here, it contains this certificate authority data. This is important information by which we are accessing the server. This is cluster information. And another important information is that which admin.config file contains is the IP address of the your server. Now point here is that the point here is that this is my private IP address of cluster master server, right? So if you want to access it from your laptop or some other places, you need to make sure that there is a proper proxy server setup or you have access to the master server. From your laptop, you should be able to ping the IP address of the master node, API server node, I mean, then only you'll be able to access it. Otherwise, you will not be able to access it. This is one criteria. And another criteria is that if you have a Kubernetes cluster set up as a cloud native application inside the any cloud provider, then you don't get access to the directly access to the master server. They just give you the one link, and that link you have to use in your client server, and you will get access. So in that case, it is very easy to access. But when you are setting up your own cluster by your own hands, right? So that time you have to take care of this one. So again, you see here, it says that this is the cluster information certificate. This is the IP address to which you are going to access. 64443 is the port number. This is the name of the cluster called as a Kubernetes cluster, and this is the context. The context name which is created is called as a Kubernetes-admin, and current context which I am using is this one. The same because we have only one context here, and by which user you are accessing it by using the Kubernetes-admin. I'm going to show you shortly that how we can create another user and you set the context for another new user, right? And its configuration parameters are there, right? And along with that, you should have the client data key. So you have a cluster key, you have a client key. So both the keys need to be present inside the Kubernetes configuration file. Otherwise, that user will not be able to access the Kubernetes cluster. So this is important file, guys. So normally this file can be viewed by using one more command that is called as, if you don't want to view the data called as sorry, certificate data, then you can just use this command, kubectl config view. But I'm not getting anything because I have removed everything from this one. There is no context, nothing is there. So I need to bring back my file, right? So what I will do, I will go to the home directory of the root user. So this is my home directory of the root user. I need to create a directory called as .kube. And inside that, I need to copy etc kubernetes admin.conf file to .kube config file. That's it. And now I can access the entire data. So you can see here kube config file. Now it is available for me. So you can see this is my brief introduction, brief information about my configuration. Right now we are using to access the cluster. So when we use the command called as a config view, it just omits the cluster keys. it omits this information, client certificate data, and it omits the certificate authority data from this config view parameters, and you just come to know that by which user you are accessing the cluster and what is your current context. All right, so this is something about the main parameter, that is whenever you want to access your Kubernetes cluster, if this file is not present in your user's home directory, you will not be able to access the cluster by any way. This is important step. So please note down this. This is the authentication mechanism that we use to access the cluster. So before going for the, and you see here that you can use a command to see the current context also. That is, let me close this file. So if you want to see the current context as well, you can use the command kubectl config get context. So how many current contexts are present inside your system, you can find out like this. So if you have multiple contexts, so when we have multiple contexts, when we have multiple users created, so when do we have multiple users created for the development team, for the production team, for the testing team, we can create the multiple context, right? And then we can have something like this, right? So you can get a more of the context here. So right now we have only one context, but we are going to create a multiple context now. So before moving ahead, if you have any questions, guys, let me please ask me, because this is something which is important to understand. If once you understand this one, then the rest of the things are very simple from the Kubernetes security perspective. So let me see that what are the questions you have asked. Tulsiram is asking, is every cluster will have a etc kubernetes admin.conf file? Yes, every cluster will have, even though if you are using a native Kubernetes configuration file. Native Kubernetes cluster in any enterprise level cloud service provider, it will have this admin.conf file also. You can use any methodology to deploy the Kubernetes cluster inside any cloud service provider. You will have this file. Okay, I hope
no,
that.
Ramesh. Actually, yeah, I'm looking for answer. Like if I use COPS, I able to talk to my cluster by using a kubectl server, right?
Correct. No, the point here is that I'm saying
But
COPS is the one of the method to deploy the EKS cluster inside the AWS, right? COPS is the one of the method. It is the AWS method which is used to deploy the cluster inside that one. Right, Tulsiram?
yeah, correct. But I'm asking this config, this config file be available in master server only. I mean, master server.
No, the configuration file will get created inside the master server only, right? But when you try to access your Kubernetes cluster from your laptop, right, they give you a couple of commands. So when you fire that couple of commands, see that it will create some config file inside the home directory of your user which you are using. It will get created. So unless and until that information is not available on your laptop, that keys are not available, that file is not available, you will not be able to access. But that will be only for your IAM user. Okay, you will not be, anybody else will not be able to access that. Okay, so yes, Venkatesh, these are the commands which we have used. Please, can you open the Kubernetes admin file? This is the file which I have opened, Ramesh. Do you have any questions specific on that? Okay. Yes, correct.
Ramesh, just one question. So like in Windows world, like we have a ADS, Active Directory Services, okay, which used to manage computer and other device on the network. So can we link in that sense, because like suppose if for example, like if a new employee join our organization, we create that user, we provide them a user ID and password to which they can access our organization details or maybe website like that. So is it in that sense like we are designing it?
Yeah, it is the same thing, same way.
So
It is same thing.
like in case like if the means suppose if we have more users, so where actually we maintain that?
We
Like
have to maintain
nothing but a
Kubernetes cluster
database. Sorry, yeah.
in the Kubernetes cluster.
So Kubernetes cluster, can you show me that file where actually we store that particular user? Okay, this is a user and this is the access we are providing to that.
Yeah, that I am going to create now. We are going to create a couple of users now.
Sorry. Okay, thank you very much.
But the question you asked about this, the way we use in the normal scenario, right? To give the access to the employees to access certain servers, we create a common directory structure and give it to them. So that is the same thing we can say. Yes.
Yeah, because I'm just comparing with Microsoft Windows with Linux here. Okay.
Right, correct. So no, its concepts are same in both operating systems. Only one. Now I just want to tell you one more thing. See, think about one situation that this Kubernetes cluster is somewhere here in the cloud or some data center, and my offices are across the, let's say, globe, and all of our employees are accessing the same cluster. How they will access it? IP address is same for everyone, right? You have to create this user IDs here inside this one Kubernetes cluster, right?
Correct.
And give them that configuration file with appropriate rollback access control, so that the user who is a developer will access only that namespace called as a developer namespace, something like that. This same.
So that can be controlled via namespace also, right? It means if you want to provide a certain access to that particular namespace, we can provide that also. Certain users will access.
Right. So we have to assign the permissions or roles to the user on the namespace only, namespace base only, right? We should not give the entire cluster's access if it is a developer or if it is a normal user. If you are admin, then you should give the certain rights cluster role to that particular user.
Okay, and one more thing I would like to ask, like you have explained, I forgot that related to some live lag environment where we should not store that admin.conf file. So elaborate once again, because I think I have missed something. I'm not able to understand that.
See, admin.configuration file is nothing but when we deploy the Kubernetes cluster inside any environment, right? By using a admin user ID, which has all the rights, cluster rights, and it creates one cluster role based configuration file, and that configuration file is nothing but your admin.conf file, right? Which you copy inside the right now I am accessing my cluster by using root user ID, by using this root user ID, Kubernetes admin, not this root, this root, and this user ID has all the rights. So we should not expose this user ID. We should not expose the context of this user ID. So then what is the other solution I was trying to tell you, that create a multiple users, create their context and give that context file to every user. Okay, so but in any case you required something like that, you required a root password or root user ID to access your cluster because something has gone very bad, right? And that time you can use this admin.conf file to access. I hope that I answered it.
Yeah, and what will be the location where we need to store it? Means like, as you told that it should not be visible or exposed to the outside world. So you told that to make a certain copy of it, right, and store it. So it can be stored where we have. Sorry.
Normally, it should not be on the same server where you are going to use it from. Right? You should not keep. Yeah, you can keep it on some other server where you have a vault or something like that. There you can keep it.
So is it that the name should be matching admin.conf, or we can rename it with any other thing so that if anybody try to access, it should not be able to find out, okay, this is admin.conf file where all the context has been stored.
Yeah, that we can try to change. I think then we have to change the API server configuration, that read the configuration file like this one, not like this one. We have to change in the configuration file. We have to explore that more.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Yeah, that is called as a customized resource definition.
Okay, but what is a general practice like?
General practice is like this one. See, if you are, if let's say Ramesh is trying to access the Kubernetes cluster, create a context with Ramesh configuration file and give it to him only. So that configuration will be accessed from Ramesh laptop only, not from any other laptop. Unless and until Ramesh is not giving his credentials and this context file to somebody else, nobody else will be able to access the cluster with your user ID.
Correct.
Yeah, so that is the general practice need to be followed.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Anuj, that is a API server on master. Correct. That is the IP address.
That's the port number of API server component then.
Right. On which you will
Thank
be able
you.
to communicate. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Partha is asking to get this kubeadmin from workstation or remote base station mode. What needs to be installed and what needs to be configured? To get this kubeadmin from workstation. No. Are you talking about the configuration file, Partha?
Yeah, Ramesh. So basically, yeah, I think in the exam also we'll be getting the workstation, right? So from the workstation only we'll be connecting to the master server and we'll be doing all the activity. So I think now we are talking about the same. So managing the entire Kubernetes from a remote or from the workstation or from the Bastion remote network. So
Right.
what needs to be done and what configuration we have to do. So
Okay. See, basically, if it is a cloud native, okay, if it is a cloud native Kubernetes cluster like EKS or AKS, there will be two commands will be given to you. That commands you need to fire on the your workstation. So these commands are basically setting up the context with you for your user ID. That you need to fire. Once you fire that one, automatically that command will download the configuration file which is required for your user, and then you will be able to access it.
okay, but we don't need any client software, anything like that for because
You will
the kubelet.
you will require AZ-CLI command in case you are using you need to have you need to install this AZ command, or you need to have the AWS CLI.
No, I'm
So
not
if
even
you
talking about AWS. I'm talking about kubelet. I mean kubectl command.
yeah,
Kubectl command will be
you require it. Otherwise, you will not be able to do it. You have to install kubectl and you have to install the whatever the cloud service provider you are using. That you need to use it. Okay. All right. Now, another question came from Anuj. What is context actually? Context is nothing but the username, and it's what else? Username and the certificates which have been assigned to that user, and on which namespace it has a rights. So that becomes a context.
So I thought context is something which can be shareable. So it's like, is it not shareable? I mean, is it
No,
like one context per user?
correct. Yes,
Okay,
correct.
okay.
This is my
Yeah, thank
context.
you.
Let me config view. This is my context here for this cluster. For Kubernetes cluster,
Okay.
this is the context.
Right. Okay. So
Okay.
that's for a cluster and a username. Okay.
Right. And now I will be creating a new user, and for that new user, new context will be created.
Is it only for authentication, not authorization then, right?
This is for right now for authentication,
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
not for
Yeah,
authorization,
thank
not
you.
for authorization.
Yeah.
Okay. Rishi is asking, does the config file really store the information on what all nodes it can talk to? Not on all nodes, Rishi, only on the master API. It has access to the master API only, not to the worker nodes.
Yeah, then how, like when you do this kubectl get nodes, how is it really trying to?
No, that API
Yeah.
server is retrieving the information and giving it to you back to you.
I'm more interested on where does it info get stored, like what all nodes it can talk to, and even when we are really installing a pod, I mean, when we are really running a pod, it will run on multiple machines, right? So where does that info getting stored?
No, see, if whenever any user trying to talk to the cluster or create a pod on the worker nodes, the manifest YAML file or the command line, imperative or declarative, if you fire the command, that command will be, this user will be only able to talk to this API server. And API server will talk to their internal components like etcd, as well as other components such as scheduler and everything, and then it will deploy the pods on the respective worker nodes. Once
Okay,
it is
so can we see the configuration of the API server? That is.
Can you see the configuration of API server?
API server, yes.
So API server configuration is here available. kubectl, it is a pod actually. This is a pod. Can you see here?
Okay.
This is my API server. Okay, and if you want to log inside, I don't know whether it is allowed. kubectl execute -it, and if you want to log inside that one, need to check whether it is a bash or something like that. No, it doesn't allow you to, right? Because error from server kubepm is not found. Oh, I'm so sorry. I need to use kube system. It is some algorithm, nothing else. It is some software. It doesn't allow me to log in inside it. Let me try with the some another shell. They might have used the shell called as a no login. Yeah, we got into inside this one. See, it is my, I am inside the API server now here. You can see what is my operating system on this one. OS-release. I think it might be a Ubuntu. Yeah, it is Ubuntu. Look at this. Debian.
Right, because our server is Ubuntu, so it is the.
No.
Oh, your
No.
server is not Ubuntu?
No, server is Ubuntu, but my pod may be different. It might be using some other operating system.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Right. So this is my Kube API server master pod through which we are accessing. Now we have to understand. We have to go in deep dive.
Can you go back to that etc folder? No, within the API server.
Okay.
I just want to see what are all the folders.
Yeah, it contains a lot of information. Machine ID, login. Same information is available. All RC3.5 and everything is there.
Okay.
This is something which we see additional from the security perspective.
But bind is a report, blacklist, so we can really use the ports within that list.
But I'm curious about to know about where is my. See, this is certificate.
Right, there is certificates.
Yeah, certificate is
okay,
inside.
Okay. Now you get into the Kubernetes folder over here. There should be a file which should, which should have the list of all the worker nodes and their machine IDs.
Yeah, one second. Yeah, this is my inside the Kubernetes folder. It contains only certificates. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it is containing certificates only. And it is a database also. You have etcd database.
Right.
Yeah, and the size of the etcd database should be less because we don't have anything right now as such. No, this is a folder again which contains the. This is not etcd database. Sorry, I'm so sorry. It contains the certificates for that. Actually, it is using a configuration map file. So we'll come back to this on this one.
So can we check anyway, like which all worker node is attached to this one? Ramesh, sorry for that.
From which place?
From like, because we have used a join command, right, to join two cluster node, worker node 1 and worker node 2. So in case like if you want to check the dependency of master, so can we check where it has
You are
been?
asking me to check it from the inside the this API server pod, right?
Right, right. Because
All
there
right.
should be some configuration which it can look into when it is trying to pull up all the worker nodes.
Yeah, I got your question. First of all, I will check
Isn't it
out.
everything stored in ETC database, not locally here?
No, locally it is stored, but most of the components are there on the. See, basically every pod which is running right now in the Kubernetes cluster is actually running as a. See, these bound points are there. This space is there for every pod. Whenever you create a pod, that pod will have something like this one, and inside that you can find out all the information, which this information gets mounted inside the pod, nothing else. So I just need to check out the algorithm which is used inside the API server master node, right? API server master node, where that is actually stored, that we need to check out.
Or maybe it may not be stored in API, maybe it might be stored in HCD. Because
No,
API is just what we say, it's a REST, means like API, right? API gateway. So maybe
no,
like
there will be algorithm of the gateway inside that pod only. It will not be anywhere else. Okay. And there is a
fine. Ramesh, we can skip it. Maybe like if you can have some search, or maybe we can also look into it. We can continue to the other topic. Yeah. Thank you very much for this. But like it's really interesting. Like we went into detail because normally we just pointing to our material, study material. But yeah, it is quite insight. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm so sorry, guys.
Namespace.
Thanks, Ramesh.
Yeah, thank you. It is not taking back.
SH.
Yeah, it is there in the search. So I will definitely show you guys where is the etcd database, how to take a backup of the etcd database, and everything will be shown to you. Okay, but please make sure that whatever the architecture, this is one thing that to all of you guys should understand. Everything which we see in the Kubernetes master server is a pod, and you can access the pod. You can change the contents of the pod, and you can create a customized resource definition also. So if you want, right now we are in the layer 1 where we are just trying to understand how to use the Kubernetes cluster. Your layer 2 should be study should be that go in depth of each pod and try to understand their algorithm. And your third parameter should be that how you can define your own custom definition so that you can customize your cluster as per your requirements. So these are the three layers you need to do the study. So first of all, let's understand the layer 1 properly, then go into the layer 2. Okay, but I have given you the road for layer 2. So please use that one. Okay, so now what is the important thing that let me finish? I think that everything, all questions has been taken because I am going to create a users now quickly. ETCD.
Sorry, Ramesh. One question was, rather than copying these files on the client machine, which doesn't sound very professional way of handling it, can we not integrate it with some LDAP or any other directory server so it's all centralized?
You can do that. You can.
Okay. Is this something you would be showing us later on?
No, etcd database is there. No, LDAP integration is not in the part of as a curriculum, but you can use a LDAP database as a backend for the etcd. And as a professional part, that particular question which you asked, right? See, if Anuj is the developer, Anuj will get only configuration file for his credentials.
But someone can copy my file, right? And they can pretend as Anuj and they can use it.
No, unless and until your laptop is not hacked. or unless and until your IAM user of the, or maybe your Azure ID is not hacked, nobody will be able to do that. So otherwise,
Okay.
everything is hackable then,
So
right?
in other way, so
Uh-huh.
rather than having this, just to get the confirmation,
Yeah,
so
sure,
can
sure.
we, rather than maintaining these files, you said it's possible to integrate with Active Directory servers or any other LDAP server. So, clients
Mhm.
will not have to maintain anything on their local machine, and they just can log in it. It'll go to that LDAP or Active Directory server, authenticate, and then proceed further, right?
Right, that is true, absolutely true. But
Okay.
from the client side, how will initiate a traffic towards your cluster? You need to have
So,
some APIs for that. You need to have some HTTPS connection to talk
uh-huh.
to the cluster, and inside that you need to set up a context, which should be along with the certificates. So that minimal information is required to connect to the cluster. But actually, information its user ID and password, if you want to maintain it from the
Mhm.
centralized location called as
Mhm.
LDAP or activity, you can do that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool. Thanks, Ramesh.
Ramesh,
Okay.
I have a question that we are using here the root @master, but actually we are using Kubernetes admin user ID to fire the
Right.
QCTU commands. Am I right?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. This is just user to access my operating system, but to access the cluster, I need KubeADM user.
Okay, great, great.
Thank you. Yes, Rajesh Shekhar, correct. You are understood it correctly. Get context means we get users of Kubernetes. Right. Yes, Sundar. What is this 10.0? It is a API server IP address. It is a master server's private IP address. Raj Shekhar. No, it is a Kubernetes machine IP only. It is a master server's IP address. Is that clear, Raj Shekhar?
Yes,
Hmm.
Ramesh,
If,
other doubt is we are having
uh,
a config file admin.config.
uh-huh.
If we have 10 users, then we have to create 10 admin.config files, or we can use multiple users in the same config file.
No, then it will be problem, right? If you have, right now we are going to do that only. In one file, we are going to create a 10 users. But in a real scenario, you should have only one user.
Then
You
how
have to,
come administrator knows which admin has which access? How he can know?
no. See, administrator has to fix the access that is there.
Hmm.
Precisely, we have to use in the role binding concept at the cluster level.
Okay,
So we'll see that
okay,
one. Yeah.
okay, okay. Thank you.
Ramesh, that means
So now,
multiple users can have that admin.conf. Means is that creatable, or means as we see earlier that admin.conf file is we received that when we installed that Kubernetes. Means
right, and it holds the information about the only kubeadmin user, right? Root user.
yeah.
But I don't want to use that. I want to use a normal user. That time we required a admin.conf file with that user ID.
Okay, but for multiple users, how come that can be obtained?
You can create it when we use the command kubectl context set context. That command is there. If you do that one, it creates the config file automatically.
Okay, okay, that will be our next learning, I think so.
Yeah, I think that I can show you. You just note down this command because I want to show you this, guys. But for that purpose, I need a AKS cluster. And when we have the practicals of the cluster upgradation and everything, that time I will show you. But please note down this command, this question. I will be definitely showing you.
Okay, sure, sure.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, Vivek, that is true. You
Do you
can.
mind pasting that in the chat for us?
Yes, I'm doing that one. Vivek. Yeah, that is true. Is Kubernetes supports Active Directory? It can support. ETC database can come from any side. And if you are using a AKS is basically based on all the users which you create. They are based on the Active Directory. So Sonali is asking the question called as a PAM, that is a pluggable authentication model. It is a Linux concept, Sonali, and which takes the password from the user who enters the user ID and password and checks with the backend whether it is correct or not. if you have used LDAP, if you have used Active Directory, if you have used shadow file, any authentication mechanism you have used in the backend, that backend mechanism connection between the user ID and password and the backend connection is done by using the PAM. It is a Linux concept.
Okay, it's plugin admin model.
Pluggable authentication model.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ramesh.
So how to view those permission, Bolan? You are asking something related to roles, right? So we'll see that one. I hope that you are asking that. What is the question, Bolan? If you want to ask, you can ask me again. Because
Yes, I was talking about the role, like you said, the role or the user who want to, like the developer, and the producer. Yeah. How did they get?
we'll see. We'll see that. We'll see. Rajshekhar, if you change admin.conf file, no, even if we try to change admin.conf file, but that particular credentials, that user ID, that context should be present inside the Kubernetes cluster. Otherwise, if you change anything, that cluster will not identify. The certificates which is given by the Kubernetes cluster and the certificate which you generate for your user should be matched. That is important information. Otherwise, it won't be identified. Does it provide integration with LDAP? Yeah, that I think we have. I have answered this question, Anuj, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, correct, Rajshekhar. We have discussed that. You see, guys, that we will see this particular Rajshekhar's question in the AKS cluster configuration for sure. Anirban is asking, we are using root at the master. Actually, we are using, yes, correct. I think we have discussed it, right, Anirban?
Yeah, I got it.
Yes, correct. He has given the answer. Ranjit, yeah, this is correct, right, Ranjit? This is the right syntax actually. But this user should be present inside. This is the actually you are doing for the Linux operating system user or maybe Windows operating system user. But that user should be present inside the cluster, and that context should be inside the admin.conf file. Correct. We need to create a user Vivek. Then only you can create a different context for that. We'll create that one now. Yes, we are going to create that. So Pujita is asking, is there any need that user need to have access to his config file, because admin can place the config file remotely so that it will. No, that is not required. Pujita, whenever you try to access the Kubernetes cluster from your laptop, if you have created your IAM user or maybe a Active Directory user in the Azure, okay, so there will be set of the commands, and there is a couple of commands which you need to fire on the client side. If you fire that, automatically that configuration will set inside your laptop, okay, and then you will be able to access it. So otherwise they are not giving the access to that configuration files directly to us, and we have to fire that commands. Yeah, sort of, right, correct. Anuj, this is correct one. You need to have the kubectl binary file and relevant admin.conf file need to be present on the server.
So this conf file, Ramesh, can I just copy it when we during the installation? I mean, you shared those commands, so it creates those config admin.conf file. Is this the same file that I can copy on my local machine?
Yes, that is what we do on the local machine, but the machine which you, the problem what is actually, see, the way I have deployed the Kubernetes cluster right now, there are 3 virtual machines, and we have initiated the cluster by using the private IP address. We have not used the public IP address,
Right.
and that is the
Okay.
reason
So
we
I
will not
cannot
be able to
access it.
access it. Right. But if you have
So
the
what?
public IP address exposed, or your DNS name exposed to the while creating a cluster, then you can do that from the command your local laptop also.
Hey
Okay.
Ramesh,
Okay.
this is Vivek.
Yeah, Vivek.
Just want to give you a little bit. I have my own VMware vCenter in my one of the laptop. I configured it. I created three virtual machines, Linux CentOS, and created one master and two node using CentOS VMs, and then I do have my own laptop, right? And it's all private. It's not nothing. It's connected to any world basically, right? It's all private IPs, and I'm able to connect my laptop, which is my another laptop, to my those VMs which I created on my VMware using copy this config admin.conf file to my local laptop, and from there I was able to, I have kubectl software installed, on my laptop, and I was able to connect to my master server. I don't have to log into master server, just like which we are doing right now. I know that this not be the correct, but I need to understand if you just draw on a whiteboard couple of scenarios to understand, because I am hearing a lot of questions which is confusing to everyone, and all are over related. Like if we have a, forget about the cloud. I know that if you have a public or private IPs, that confuse more. Think about that you have an on-premises Kubernetes cluster, you have a private network, no access to outside world. In that case, you have multiple users in your environment, in your production scenarios. In that case, what we need to do a rollback access control.
That will discuss. One second.
That is
First
more
of
important.
Okay, let me just give the answer of one question first of all. Okay, if I have these servers, this is Kubernetes cluster, and inside that, if I have 3 nodes here, this is my master node, and if I have any worker nodes, irrespective of that one. Okay, and I have this laptop here. Now from this laptop, I want to access my API server. First and foremost thing, which I was talking right now, is you should be able to access this master server from the laptop. It should be in the same range.
Correct.
Okay, if that is the case, then I can copy the configuration file from the master server and put it inside the laptop, and it will work.
Correct.
Okay, this is a scenario. Actually, the Anuj has asked the same question. Now, what happened? Now, this my master server, this particular Kubernetes cluster is now on the AWS, on the Azure, right?
Yeah.
And when I populated the master's Kubernetes cluster on one of the master server here, so that time we use kubeadm init command. So when I fired that kubeadm init command to create a cluster, it took the local IP address, private IP address of the master server. Unfortunately, this private IP address of this master server is not accessible from my laptop now. And that is why I'm not able to copy the configuration file of this master.
What about if we create another virtual machine, Azure or AWS? Think about that's your local computer.
Then you can do it.
That's what the scenario should be, right? I understand what you're saying, because you cannot connect to private IPs from your local laptop. But if we have another VM which we are giving to a system admin, and now the scenario is same, whether it's on premises or cloud, right? Now you have a multiple VMs, and those VMs are given to your, let's understand that it is not the best practice, but let's understand that each user has its own VMs. Now that VM should not log into the master server, right? It has to control through their own virtual machine. In that case, what we could do?
In one answer, in one question, and one line answer is that if they are in the same subnet, and if from this virtual machine, if you are able to access the master server, you will be able to do the same thing.
Right. So that's what exactly we need to understand, that how many users, each user should be created, and what roles and authentication authorization we have to provide.
Now that will do. That will do now. That is the exercise we have to follow now. Okay, only thing was that here that I just wanted to make sure that everybody understand how the access of the master API server is taken from the laptops, or from the, if you are accessing directly from the master server, how do you do that? That was the only discussion. I hope that everybody is clear about it.
Yeah, Ramesh, just to add, so that cannot be done now because the IP address what we have is a private IP address, but I'm sure it is feasible to, somehow expose this on a public IP address, or probably another sort of a mapping of a public IP address to this private address. Is this feasible at all, or it's not?
You have to use the natting concept then. If you nat it properly, it will work.
All right, she's cool. Thanks.
But only problem here is that Anuj, that you need to use the IP address of the API server,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
That is the only concern. If you have initiated the cluster with the public IP address or DNS name, then
Mm,
it becomes easy and it
mm,
is possible, more convenient and more possible. But if you are directly using a private IP address from, and if you are trying to NAT, that may not be that in somehow
okay.
I feel that it will not work. Then you have to do the port
Okay.
forwarding for the port, as well as a lot of things will need to be done. Okay.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Uh, Ramesh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, actually, for example, our laptop is in the network only. Then can you show us how we can connect and how we can copy the config file to our machine
No, this
from
is
the
the
master?
simple command. You have to use cp etc kubernetes, that command
Okay, so that
inside.
it will create dot cube in our local system.
Right, you have to create a directory called as a .cube in the home directory of the user,
Okay.
and inside that you have to use command cp etc kubernetes admin.conf as a config file. Okay, like this one.
Okay.
Then it will work.
That means we are copying that file to our local system, that config file.
Correct, correct.
Okay. Thank you, Ramesh.
No, see, I will add just one user here, user one here. And okay, and if I try to log in to this user one, su-user one, right? And what is the home directory of this user? Oh, this is the Ubuntu. I need to use -m option. So let me use -m option. Forget about this user, root user. I'm using the user two, let's say. Okay, and now let me log in with this user two. Correct. And now, if I type a command called as kubectl get nodes, will I be able to get the answer? No, it says that it doesn't have environmental parameters. So what I will do here, I will create a .cube folder inside the user2, and now this user doesn't have rights to copy it, so I need to go back to it. So let me just check out what is the home directory. This one I need to copy by using a root cp etc kubernetes admin.conf file to the home directory of user2 inside that .cube folder, right? And I have to copy as a config. Okay, and now I need to change the ownership of it. So change the ownership as user2 user2 to the home user2. You have to precisely use the same commands which you have fired while creating the Kubernetes cluster. Now you log in with the user called as user2, and now see if you can fire the command called as kubectl get nodes. You are able to access it from the user.
But Ramesh, this
Thank
has
you.
the admin privilege, right? Context is admin rights in this case. Every user will have the same rights, authorization.
Yeah,
I
that is
want to
sure. Only I was
restrict.
just trying to show.
I want to restrict the users with their own authorizations.
Yeah, definitely. We are going to see that now. That is our topic called as RBAC. Okay. So let's move ahead and start creating the user and set up the context for that user, and then we'll create a roles and we'll bind the role to that particular user. Okay. So first of all, try to understand how to create the context. So to create the context, what you need a certificate. We need to generate the certificate. So how do we do that one? So let me show you with the example. So guys, I have one example here. Quickly, I will show you that so that, yeah, user add. I'm going to add one user called as Jin here. Okay, user has been added. So this is a new user I am adding, and we are going to create a new context for this user, guys. Okay. Then let's go inside the directory. This
Ramesh,
is the home directory.
what do -m do in there?
This is creating a home directory of the user gene /home/gene.
No,
If you
user
don't,
add -m, right?
yeah, if you don't use -m option in the Ubuntu, it doesn't create this directory.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then you generate the key called as a gene.key. So you have a different options to create that one. We are using OpenSSL certificate to create a RSA key, which is up to 048 bits, right? So it will create a key now. Now we can see here, this is gene.key has been created. So cat gene.key. Can you see this is a private key has been created for this user called as a gene. All right, guys. So this is the next step we have completed. Now what we need to do, let me create this one file because it gives the error otherwise, .rnd. And now let me create the certified service request authority. Let me just create it. From the key, we have to create the certificate authority. So let me use this command. So it has created this CSR gene.csr certificate authority, right? So this is from the gene key. It has created this. What is it called as CSR stands for? It is a request, right? Yeah, it is a request. And now with the help of this key gene.key and the CSR file, we have to create a certificate now. So how to create that certificate? These are the standard commands used in the by using OpenSSL, guys. You can follow that in the OpenSSL documentation, that how to create the keys. So what we are going to do, we are using X509 protocol. We are requesting the new key, okay, by using the CSR, and certificate authority is CA is, this is ca.crt, and the ca.crt files has been created when we install the Kubernetes cluster inside the PKI folder. You can find out that, right? Yeah, correct. Thank you very much. It is a certificate signing request. So by using a certificate signing request and by using the key, we have to create a certificate now. So first of all, we have created a key. From the key, we have created a certificate signing request, and from both of them, we are creating a certificate called as a gene.crt, and that will be valid for 500 days. You can change these days also, guys. So let me copy this. Yeah, it is created. I can change these days, guys. In case I want to keep it only for 30 days, we can have like this one. If you want to create it for 365 days, I can create like this as well. Okay, so it is created. So you can see here, guys, we have certificate now. We have signing authority. We have also signing request as well as key. So you can see certificate gene.crt. Okay, so this has been created now. Now, once this is created, then what you need to do? We have to create a config set. So these are the commands which are used to set up the configs, set up the config context inside the Kubernetes cluster now, right? So till this now we are firing the commands from the Linux operating system, but after this one we are firing and we are informing the kubectl, we are informing to the API server that look, we have created the new user and please accept that user. So let me copy this. Let me create a folder called as certs at the same location. And now from this certification, you can just move it. Move these two files, certificate and key, inside the folder. So now if you go to the certs folder, you have this file. So just for the segregation purpose, we have created these two files and we have moved that two files. Okay, so I will be showing you the one more user in case you want it, but first of all, try to understand. The steps can be reiterated, guys. That is not a big thing to understand. But our main motto is that understand how to create how to set up the context with the new user. So now I'm going to use this command called as a kubectl config set credentials. For which user? Gene user. Using a client certificate which is placed at this location, as well as client key. So now see here, guys. So before that, kubectl config view, you will see the only one entry now here. Let me add this command. So it says that user gene has been set. Okay. And now if you try to fire the same command again, you should be able to see that one more context has been added here. Earlier context was for the user called as a Kubernetes, for the Kubernetes admin user. Now another context which you have created is for gene. And its client certificate data is available. Its client key data is also available here. So if you open that file, which is inside the root config file, you will be able to see that root.kube, and inside that config file is there. Now this config file is updated with the new context, new client certificate, and new client key for user called as G. Okay. Now let me come out of this. Now once this is done, then we can set up the we can create a namespace, and for that namespace we can set up the context for the user called as G. Right? Now let me just first of all show you this kubectl config get context. So it is not yet updated, we need to update it. So let me now first of all fire this command. So let me create a namespace called as a development. And for this development namespace, we want to set the context. All right, so what is your current context is a star. It is showing this Kubernetes admin. We have created a new context for the gene user. Now we want to set up that as well. So how do I do that? I can use command set context for gene, and this is the user name. For the namespace called as development. Okay, and now fire this. So it shows that gene context has been created. And now if you try to see this, you have two contexts now. One is for the Kubernetes admin user, and another is for the gene. And what is the authentication information? Name of the user is gene. For which namespace? Development. Okay. And now you can fire the command called as a kubectl config get context, or you can use whatever you want to use. Let's say that, can you just find out the user gene cannot list resources pod in API group in the namespace called as a development, because we have just assigned the namespace called as a development, but we have not assigned any role to this user. So we need to create a role for this user, and once you do that one, then only gene user will be able to list the resources inside that. So what is a role, what is the role binding, all that stuff we are going to see now. But have you understood that how to create a context for the user? So we have used this command. Till this point, we have all the operating system commands to create the certificate. But from this point onwards, we have used the commands which will set the context in the configuration file. So let's take one more example to understand this concept.
Copy these commands onto the chat box. We can just have a look at it.
Okay, no problem. Okay. Anil was asking, won't we assign admin context to gene user? No, we don't want to add admin context to the gene user. We are going to create a different context for itself, right? So we have created it. We have to just assign the role and names, role and role bindings. Vivek is
Means
asking.
every user will have a separate context,
Correct.
right?
Yes, yes. We can assign with the same. We can have a different context. Right? Namespace can be same.
Yeah, Ramesh,
Okay.
since we have created 2 users, so there will be 2 config file.
No, it has been added into only one config file now. Yeah. You want this commands to be added here, guys? Let me give it to you.
So Ramesh, here, while we are creating the user Genie, so you are adding the certificates is nothing but it's a passwordless certificate, passwordless to the user directly logging into that one, the certificate
Yeah.
purpose.
Correct, correct. Absolutely.
Okay. So once that passwordless login credential assigned to the user, and then we are giving the kubectl the credentials, whatever the role, what are the roles you are going to give, right?
Correct.
First you
Yes,
create
correct.
a namespace and get the context to that particular user, and then you are going to add the user role basis.
Right. We have to now create a role for this user.
Okay, I'm good. Sounds good. Thank you.
So let's now move ahead with the role and role. What is the role? What is the role binding? What is the cluster role? What is the cluster binding? That concept we'll see that. Or do you want me to exercise one more time this particular stuff? If you're
One more time will
good,
be
guys, can
helpful,
Is it
Ramesh.
possible
Yeah.
for you to discuss on whiteboard what we have done till now? I mean, on this, so that we have more better understanding, because we know the commands are a little bit confusing sometimes.
Makes sense.
Okay. This is your AWS account, correct? And let's say this is AWS account and you want to access it from your laptop. There is a server on this one. This is your laptop. Okay, and there is a server here and you want to access this server VM1, okay, from the laptop machine. So how do we do that? We need to have a key. So this key is generated on the AWS server, right? So here we generate the key.
Right.
And
This is till now, this is not related to Kubernetes. This is just to access how we are able to access VMs on AWS.
Let me complete this one. And now this key we import on the laptop, right? Why do we import this on the laptop? Because we want to do the passwordless authentication. Okay, so to create this passwordless authentication, such as certificate or whatever it may be, we are using it. These are the steps I have followed. Right, so this is the RAC key we have generated. It generates the public key and private key. Right, from this one we have created the CSR signing certificate signing request by using the same key which we have created, and by using the key and certificate signing request we have created the certificate called as gin.cert, and this information is added, this cert information is added in the config file of the client on the Kubernetes client. Okay, so from where you are accessing the Kubernetes cluster, that is nothing but your client, and inside that there is a configuration file. So to update, to have that certificate created, we have followed that steps. And once we set up the context, that config file gets updated with the client certificates. So once we set up the config, this config gets set up inside the Kubernetes master server. So here you can see now you have a master server now. This VM is your master server. Okay, so the certificates will be used to get authenticated towards the API server of the master. That is the way this is what we have done now, guys. But we have created one namespace here called as a development, but we have not given the roles and we have not assigned the roles to this particular user for this namespace. That's where when we try to access the pods inside this kubectl by using kubectl command from the development namespace, it gave the error. So that is the reason we have to now set up the role-based access method control on the namespace.
Just to add, Ramesh, just to add, Ramesh, I think we don't have our laptop here. We are still on the master node on VM and trying to access it from VM, right? Rather than your laptop. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, but same thing is that it
cool.
might, same thing can be used if you are having a laptop and which is in the which is talking to the master node. We can follow the same steps.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, currently it cannot be done because we have got this IP as private IP, right? That's the whole reason.
Right, that is the whole thing, right? But I will just take care for this one. I will create one virtual machine over there, and we'll try to do that one. In the next session, I will try to do that as well.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, so if you want to fire the same commands, guys, you can fire the same commands again. I hope, do you need to create one more context?
I think we don't need, and we can move on that.
Okay, we can move on.
Yeah.
Let me
the only one thing is confusion is we are creating the users on the same master node, so that's the only one confusion of this, guys. And if we created, we don't have the local laptop over here, so that's the only thing. But it's the same thing, right?
Right. That is the only thing that. What I can do, I will create a scenario. I will create one virtual machine, and I'll try to show you that as well, if time permits in the next session, guys. Don't worry about that one, but I will try to do that. Okay. It is not a big task, but I need to create a VM for that. That's it. So, guys, let's
Ramesh,
move ahead.
Anyhow, we are using Azure missions, right?
Yes.
This is also cloud, right?
Yeah, this is a cloud. This is the master machine is a cloud. Yeah.
Yeah, we are not in on-premises, so we can do that, right? Whatever we are.
Yeah, we can create one virtual machine and we can show this so that all the confusions will get removed. Okay.
Right, please.
And one more thing is that, guys, we will definitely do the same kind of exercise, but for a specific user when we deploy the AKS.
See, even usually in real time, we are not going to directly log into master server, right?
No, you are not going to log into the master server. Unless and until it is your on-premises server and you want to do some modification, then only you will be able to use it. Then only you will be logging into the master. But AKS or EKS doesn't allow you to log in. In fact, IBM Cloud doesn't allow you to log in. GCP doesn't allow you to log in inside the master node.
Yeah, better go. We'll create one kubectl server as a VM, and we can connect to our cluster. That is a best.
Yes, I will do that one. Yes, sure. I will do that.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So let's set up the RBAC first of all. So we have we have completed the setting of the context for the user. Now I would like to set up the create a RBAC for that particular user. So before that, I just want to explain you what is this RBAC, what is the role, what is the role binding. Okay, so I can show you that, guys. In this example, we have taken a devdan. Okay, so I need to take care of that when I create a rollback using the same YAML files. Okay, so let me go to this role. I will explain you this, guys. Is it the time for break? Okay, NBI. Okay, Rishi, just give me 1 minute. So you can see there, this is a role, this is the namespace, these are the rules. So we are creating a role for this namespace, and these are the verbs actually. What are the roles we are giving? List, get, watch, create, update, patch, and delete. These are the actions actually. So role is nothing but a set of actions, And another thing is that on which objects you want to apply this action is called as the resources, right? So role will contain two important things. One is, of course, on which namespace you want to deploy that role, and another one is that which actions you want to apply on the objects called as a resources, such as deployment, replica sets, pods, or whatever it may be. Okay, and then this role gets attached with the rules and associated resources, and then we can assign a subject to that, and that subject is nothing but a users and other processes. So that we'll try to create once we come back from the break, guys.
One thing, Ramesh, on this V1
Ramesh,
beta on the same file of that you were showing earlier, can we put any of the version there? I'm Sonali saying.
No, no, we can. Okay, Sonali, but where you would like to keep a version, maintain a version?
API version in the VI role dev YAML file. This one, is it like V1
We
beta
have,
1? We put beta 2 or V1 only or something like that?
yeah, this is the API version for the role.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right.
And where do
Ramesh,
we get
what
this
is the?
information from?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm taking the question because we are now going for the break. Once we come back from the break, then I will
Okay,
explain you all
Ramesh,
the stuff,
if you
the
can,
role and all that.
if you can just show us,
Ramesh,
just run the command kubectl get describe role. We'll get the API version. I think Sonali is asking how we can get the API version. So if you can just describe command.
This is what you are asking, Sonali, the
Yes.
version.
Yes.
That we can find. You can use the command kubectl explain, I think.
Explain command.
Yeah, and then we have to use role, right?
Kubectl explain role.
And in that one, you have to check the API version.
Okay. So it should be V1. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so you can see here, this is a version.
Okay. So we have to change it in the file above, that means. Does it
Right,
mean?
right. Yes,
Oh,
correct. So whenever you are creating a kind called as a role, you have to use the version RBAC, this version.
okay. Got it. Thank you.
Right? Yeah, thank you. And if you are trying for the role binding, again, you can check out here what is the role binding API version, where it has gone. This is same version is there for the role binding. Okay. So let's take a break, guys, for 10 minutes of time. Come back
Ramesh,
and
what
we'll
is
take
that
the,
API group?
which one you are asking?
In the role dev YAML file, there is a API group.
Yeah, right. API group is like this one, kubectl API resources. So there are a lot of API groups are available. Can you see this is the, for bindings, there is no API group here. So there is a huge list for this one, this is a group. For this one, this is a group, something like that. For daemon set, we have a group called as apps. For deployment, we have a group called as app. And I have used in the role. Okay, so if you're not specifying anything, that means all. And then extension as well as apps. So these groups are the blank groups, okay, as well as the groups which is coming as a extension and apps as well. That has been created. So this role is will be applicable on these API groups, apps and extensions.
Okay.
So you can find out by using the API resources command, you will be able to see the API groups which are. So API group is that daemon set is the part of the apps API group. Deployment is a part of the apps group. Right now we were seeing a role, right? So role is a, where is the role? Can you see somewhere here? I can just check. Yeah, role is a group, is a part of this group, API group. And then we use the version 1, version 2 like that. And whether you can see here whether it is a namespace component or not. Whether kind binding is a namespace, yes, true. But component status is false, right? It is not a namespace component. Is your deployment a namespace component? Yes, right? But the certificate signing request is not a namespace component. It is a cluster level component. That is the way we have to read this. Is that clear? Okay,
yes, it's clear.
All right, guys. So let's take a break for 10 minutes and come back. We'll start with the role, creating a role and assigning a role to the subjects. That is nothing but users.
Thanks so much.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what is the role? What is the role base? What is the role binding? What is the cluster role and cluster role binding? These are the four things that we need to discuss and have a clarity on that one. It is simple topic, not a difficult at all. So you have this cluster, let's say Kubernetes cluster, and you have the couple of namespaces here. You have a complete cluster and you have a namespace. So role is a namespace component. Role is a namespace. What is the meaning of this role is namespace? Is nothing but you can assign the role to the namespaces, right? And what will be there inside the role? Inside the role, there will be something called as verbs. Verbs is nothing but actions. Which actions you would like to carry on the resources that you can specify here, such as list, get, watch, and so on. So that is nothing but a verb. So verb role is nothing but is a composition or combination of lot of verbs. You can use one or you can use many also. Lot of actions. So set of rules, we say that, and the set of rules, nothing but actions, are named as a role, and on which resources you would like to do the actions, that is nothing but your resources. Because you need to have some resources to take action, right? So what can be the resources? Your API groups, right? On which API groups you would like to have the actions, or which objects you would like to have the actions, such as deployment. Okay, such as deployment, pods. These are the resources. So role will always contain the name of the role, on which namespace you want to deploy, what are the resources on which it will be deployed, and what are the actions you want to perform on the roles. So that is a role. So role is basically a namespace resource. Please keep that in mind. And what is a cluster role? Cluster role is nothing but it is a set of rules or set of actions assigned to the user for entire cluster, right? And that is not specific for the namespace. It is for the entire namespace. You can use verbs, that is called as actions, list, get, watch, and whatever it may be, and on what resources you would like to use, such as nodes. You can include, because in the namespace nodes can't come, right? So those components or those objects in the Kubernetes cluster, they are not namespaced. On all that kinds or objects, you can apply the cluster role. One of the example is nodes itself. Worker nodes are not in the any namespace. They are a cluster resources. They are cluster properties, and you can apply a role on that cluster components or properties. Okay, so to whom you want to assign this role is called as subject. Is called as subject. And what are the different subjects available? Users, processes, all these are the subjects. So I have one small definition for that, guys. What is a subject? Subject is nothing but the set of users and processes that want to access the Kubernetes API. It's nothing but a subject. What is the resources? The set of Kubernetes API objects available in the cluster, such as pods, deployment, services, nodes, persistent volume, and others. And what is the verb? These are the actions such as get, watch, create, delete, etc. But all of them are create, read, update, so something like that. It is something called as a C is for create, read, update, and there is CRUD operations. So that we can assign to the subject. So resources and verbs are defined inside the role, and this can be assigned to the subject. Subject is the user. So in our case, Gene is our subject. And what is the resources? Resources is nothing but our pods which you are going to create, or deployment which you are going to create inside the namespace called as development. And what are the actions you want to allocate to the genes that can be defined inside the role, such as do you want to allow gene user to create the pod? Do you want gene user to delete the pod? All that actions you can specify in the role, right? And you can bind that with the help of role binding. So resources and verbs are called as a role, and this role can be binded with the subject called as a role binding. Okay, so subject is nothing but a users or processes that want to get authenticated with the Kubernetes API, and they are not the objects. Okay, so now let's create the role now. So we have one, and how to find out the roles which are available right now for the default namespace. Guys, you can use command kubectl get roles. So I think there are no roles available in this, but do we have the roles for namespace called as a kube system? And there are certainly some roles are there, like reader role is there, manager role is there. These are the different roles. We can see the contents of this as well. Let's say that I want to describe this role, kubectl describe role called as kube proxy from the namespace called as kube system. And you'll get some definition of that one. So it shows that this is the name of the role. No labels are there, no annotations are there. Non-resources, and a resource name is kube proxy, and what is the action? Gate. And what kind of resource group resources it is being used? Config maps. So on config maps resource, gate option is given for the kube proxy resource. Okay, so another role, if you want to find out from the kube system only, so what is the role you want to find out, guys? We want to find out the role called as, let's say you want to see something about the ViewNet. So what is this role? What type of the verbs it has been associated? So it has two types of the verbs. One is create, another one is the get and update. Okay. So what is the resources which is used for the policy rule is a config map. What is the resource name? Is a ViewNet. So resource name is a object, guys, right? It is an object on which this action will be performed, okay, by the subject, whatever the subject is given, right? So I think in the subject we can find out the subject from the config maps. Okay. Now do you want to find out we have found the roles in the namespace called as a kube system, but we want to find out the roles which are role bindings which are across the cluster now. So kubectl get a role binding using namespace called as a kube system. So whatever the namespaces are there for the kube, this will get it. Role bindings which are available inside the kube system, you can find out. And we have just now seen the role called as a viewnet. But I think in this one we'll come to know that what is the subject. kubectl describe role binding called as a viewnet from the namespace called as the kube system. And you can see here, guys. So this is a service account, and its name is subject is service account, which name is viewnet, and on which kube namespace kube system, and it has binded with what role? Viewnet. So this is a role binding, guys, and role binding will help you to understand to which role and to which subject this has been binded, right? So you can find out by using a describe option of the role binding. I hope that this is clear. Let's create
Ramesh, you told subject would be like users and process, but service account is the process.
Service account is a kind of users which is used to talk between the services of the cluster. Let's say kube system, kube proxy want to talk to the kubelet or etcd object, right? So that time the normal user which is there will not be able to talk to, right? So all the components in the kube cluster, such as etcd, such as API server, such as your kube proxy, viewnet, all these are the objects inside the Kubernetes clusters. So which user will be able to communicate between them? The user which is used, yeah, is called as a service account.
You mean like to talk to each object? I mean different objects in our cluster, I mean Kubernetes cluster, then we need to create a service account.
Correct. Our user will be able to only talk to the API server, and whatever the roles and authorization is given, that user will be able to access it from the outside. But internal master nodes and worker nodes, there are a lot of resources which are available, objects are there, and they are continuously talking to each other. So for them, service accounts are required.
Okay, thank you.
Ramesh, can you please differentiate the role and the role binding?
Okay, sure, I will definitely. So can you see this? This is a default one service account, and it has a one secret as well. So you can also get the information about the secrets. This is also objects. We can find out this is a token information. Okay, so that is a secret kind of stuff. So service account is used to communicate between the services or objects which are there in the cluster, and secrets are something which if you want to use some user ID and password, some environmental parameters such as MySQL root underscore database. If you want to create that as a SSL certificate rather than creating using the just password, that time you can create a secret and you can keep it in the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, if time permits, I will show you that how to create the secrets also, guys. Don't worry about it. Somebody asked me somebody asked me some question, right? Role binding and role, right? So role is nothing but user called as Gene has certain amount of privileges or permissions on the namespace called as a development. Okay, so user is a Gene that is called as a subject. Okay, and role is called as something, let's say role is called as a developer role, And in that developer role, we specify what are the resources and what are their actions. So role binding will bind these roles with the subjects. That is a user account or service account. Okay, so let me create now role, guys, and then we'll take the questions, please. So role.yaml.
Ramesh, if you can create a new namespace for testing, that will be good. Instead of creating a cube, system privileged namespace, let's create a new role namespace also as well.
So we have a namespace called as, which is created some time back, called as a development. I'm going to use a development namespace now.
That is fine.
Yes, okay. All right. So now where that role has gone, let me just check out, guys, what is the name of the role-dev. That is the name of the YAML file. Okay. Now you can see that which you have seen earlier. So this is the name of the role. What is the name of the role? Can somebody tell me what is the name of the role from this particular YAML file?
Development.
Developer.
Right. On which namespace we are going to deploy that development. So this role will be in the boundaries of the namespace called as a development. It will not be used anywhere else, right? Okay. Now what are the actions which we are going to perform on the resources called as a deployment, replica sets, and pods from the API groups? These API groups. These resources are coming from these API groups, and what type of the actions you would like to perform? This is called as a verb, right? So role contains namespace, and the role contains the list of the actions, and role contains resources, right? So let me create a role in the namespace called as a developer, right? Development, right? If I'm not wrong, hopefully that this is the same spelling I have used. kubectl create namespace called as development. I hope that it is same thing. Yeah, it is already exists. Good. So let me deploy this now. kubectl apply -f. So we are creating a role, guys, right? Role-dev.yaml. So this is created. You can check this role also. kubectl get role from namespace called as a development. Yes, and you have this role, and you can describe this role as well. kubectl describe role called as a developer from the namespace called as development. And this is what we have done right now. See, okay. So deployment pods, these are the resources, and these are the resource names, but all the resource names comes there. And what are the actions? These are the actions we have applied. Okay, so we have created a role now. Now we have to create a role binding. We have to do the role binding. We have to bind this role with the subject called as Gene user, right? So let me go and find out the file for the role binding. It is a role bind. So let me pick up that file, guys. Role bind.yaml. And you can see that this is the name of the role, role bind called as the developer role binding, which is going to be used as development in the namespace development for the user called as Gene for all the API groups. And what is the role reference? We have to give the role reference. Kind is role. What is the name of the developer, and what is API groups? All API groups, right? So we have in the role binding, what we have the namespace. We have the name of the users to which you want to bind the role called as a developer. So we have subject as well as we have a role. Okay, and that is what we are going to do now. So now let me save this and kubectl apply -f role bind.yaml. So we have created this particular role bind. You can see here kubectl role bind from the namespace called as development. So we got role bindings, right? Yeah, we have this role binding, and we can describe also kubectl describe role binding. What is your role binding? This one. So let me specify here. And it shows that the subject is user gene and the name is developer. Annotation, these are the annotations. So where is my role? Yeah, role is developer. I'm so sorry. Role is developer and this is subject. So we are binding with the help of this particular binding statement YAML file, the gene with this developer role. So earlier we seen one command, that time it was forbidden, right? It was giving a error code as a forbidden. Now will gene user will be able to create a pod inside the namespace called as the developer, or will be able to see that pods? Let us see that. So what we are going to do, we are going to create one pod by using this command. We are going to see the pods by using this command. kubectl context is equal to gene dash context. That is the context we have created. Get pods. Now it will say that there are no pods available right now. So can we create one more pod and see that whether we are able to? Let me create a pod by using this command, using the context called as the gene context. We are not using any other context, guys. We are using a gene context here. Oh, I'm so sorry. So dollar is not required here. It shows that pod engine is created, and where it has got created, it has got created inside the namespace called as development. So you can see here kubectl get pods from the namespace called as a development. You'll be able to see that Nginx started running. So can we use a context called as a gene to access it? So let me see that. And yes, it is able to do that, right, guys? So by setting up the role, by defining the role, and by doing the role binding and actions, we will be able to perform the task. That user will be able to perform the task on that namespace. So this is the one of the example of the role and role binding. So let me see if you have any questions, guys, so that we can go ahead quickly. Vivek is asking, Ramesh, can we have a subject as a pod? Let's say if web pod wants to access DB pod and needs to access DB pod. So in that case, you have to create a service account. No, that is so accessing the pod. See, all the pods can access any other pods in the cluster. They are not having any restrictions. For that purpose, you have to create a network security.
But, Ramesh, that is also one security issue, right? If we have a private network, I understand, but each pod access to every pod, it's also security threat. Once you have access to one pod, if you are able to log in or access to one pod, then you can access to any pod. In that case, that's a security breach, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely correct. And that is the way, this is a Kubernetes default behavior, that if you have 100 namespaces and in each namespace you have hundreds of the pods, each pod will talk to any other pod. They will be able to communicate with each other. Okay, without any restriction. But we have to create a network security for that one. And we are going to see in the next topic how to apply the network security for the pods. Right, but as such we cannot create a subject called as a pod. You can say that pod is my username. If you are using a username as a pod, then it will work, right? or if you are saying that DB is my username, then in that case it will use. But as a
Why I'm
pod,
asking this
we cannot
question?
use
Because in cloud, let's say talk about AWS, you have a security group, right? And the
Hmm.
security group applies to on a EC2 instance level. So that each is, it doesn't matter that you have multiple private subnets. That means that all the EC2 can talk to any EC2. Yes, default, yes. If you are on default VPC, I believe. But if you have your own custom VPC, then you have to have a security group rules assigned so that this EC2 can talk to this EC2, right? So same way, there has to have some kind of custom namespace, or I don't know what should say in this Kubernetes world, where each pod can talk to each other pod basis on their security level.
Yeah, that is called as a network security. So we will see that. And you are absolutely correct. Right now, completely it is a security threat is there, because once you go get access to the one namespace, you can access all the pods from the another namespace also. So if you go into the one namespace pod, let's say pod 1, and if you have the IP address of the another pod, you can easily ping. Visibility might not be there, but access is there. Because this particular, if I use the context called as this one, in context get pods from the get pods, but I want to do it from the namespace called as kube system. So it is forbidden. Namespace visibility is forbidden, but if you have the IP address of the another pod, and if you are in the namespace called as development, you can easily access or ping the pod which is in the different namespace also. Okay, but visibility might not be there as a role and role binding concept. Okay. Rishi is asking, while performing a describe, do we need to use a namespace? Is that no, it is not mandatory. But whatever is the default namespace which you have chosen right now is a default one, that will be shown. You need to change the default namespace then. Okay.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
If you are using a development, you can use that one.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes,
Is resource name is
responded back.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anirban.
Okay, Anirban has given that answer. Okay. Is resource name is subject?
Sorry, just to add, what Vivek was raising a point, Vivek. Generally, if there's a communication between two services, they still need to authenticate themselves and pass some sort of token. In ideal word, so I think that way it is sort of protected. So let's say you've got three microservices talking to each other, they just cannot talk to each other without passing any token in an ideal situation in a production based system. So that way I think it is sorted. So I could not quite
see. Basically, Anuj, what is the situation here?
What I feel is like what Vivek is asking is like communication between two pods. Okay. Pods can,
Yeah,
so
so
your scenario might be
communication.
good. Like if a pod is having a multiple container, then yes, through JWT token or whatever you use for token based application, we can agree on that. But pod to pod, I think it's a network which I think Ramesh is going to cover. Is that correct?
Yeah. So let me just.
My understanding. Just my understanding. Yeah.
Let's say this is I have two namespaces called as a prod and dev, and inside this I have a couple of pods here. This is one pod, and I have another pod in the another namespace, like this one. Okay, so these pods may not be able to see each other. So if any user has the rights to access these pods on namespace only, and another user is having access the pods from this namespace. So when the user tries to access the pods from another namespace, the visibility is not there. But by anyway, the user has logged into this pod 1, and now from this pod 1, this user can easily ping to this pod 2. If this user has the IP address of this pod 2, then this user can easily ping the pod. It can be accessible. But yes,
this is
course,
not a valid scenario, right?
Yeah.
But this is not a valid scenario. Like if somebody having a namespace of dev, how can he switch to production namespace? This is one issue.
No, switching will not happen. See, if there is a role binding is appropriately given, then the user from dev will not switch to the pod 1. What I'm saying, by any chance, this user, let's say user 1, which is having access to the dev namespace, got the IP address of the pod 2. So then this user can log in into the pod 1, and from that it can ping the pod 2. So in short, all the pods, it is, forget about the users, all the pods from all the namespaces can talk to each other. It can
Okay,
be
and that's
the,
because they all are on same node.
no, they are on the different nodes. They are in the namespace, I'm saying.
They are on the same network.
They are on the same
Okay.
network, right?
Right.
This is
Okay.
this is the one scenario, and to sort it out, we have to work on the network security part.
All right.
Ramesh,
Hmm.
Ramesh, the cluster itself we define as prod and dev, right? Since you are sitting in a single cluster, so is there any scenario that we can maintain two different namespace like dev and prod?
So this is a different namespace only, dev and prod.
Yeah, but the cluster itself is a dev cluster. I have separate cluster for prod as well. So
No,
which
this
means
is my one cluster. Inside that, I
correct.
have two namespaces called as a development and prod. And if you are saying if you have altogether different cluster, then the pods will not talk to each other by any way, because it is a different cluster altogether.
No, that's my question. Like Anuj is raising that point, right? I forgot his name. Like it's a problem.
Yeah.
Dev and prod is communicating. Since those are sitting in a same network, definitely they would be communicating. So that is quite common. You said we can apply the network security groups.
Correct,
So
Sundar.
since the cluster itself is a dev cluster and I have another prod cluster, so I can maintain the security parameters very tightly with respect to cluster level.
Right, right. That is true, because
Just
it is completely isolated network. But
Correct.
however, in the real scenario, this might be there that you have only one Kubernetes cluster and you have the two environments itself inside one cluster. One is
see.
development and one is production, right?
Yeah.
So that,
See, yeah, your namespace can be anything. It could be based on of your type of services. You know, you are developing various type of services. So let's say one type of service you will give one namespace. So I think having it dev and prod here is a bit confusing. It is giving a sort of a impression that you have two types of
Correct.
environments here, but it can be anything. It can be a type of services, or you want to say how you want to segregate your pods
this
really.
is my app one and this is my app two,
Yeah, perfect.
right? I think
This
that
is
will
now
be.
Maybe you can
perfect.
just put
Yeah,
like a
this
one
clears.
namespace as finance. Maybe you can put the namespace as
That
finance, other as a marketing.
Okay, okay.
yeah,
Right
There was
finance.
now,
a
Now
Yeah,
this
that
is
would
good.
make more
Yeah.
sense.
this is HR and this
Yeah,
is finance, right? Yeah, correct.
yeah.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
remove it app completely. You just can have based on HR type of services there, finance type of services in one namespace. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I was just thinking like if you have a two different namespace in the same cluster, then the penetrations test itself will fail.
No, you cannot deploy like this one. You have to specifically use the network security in case you are using multiple applications inside one or microservices in one cluster. Otherwise it will not work only. Penetration testing will be failed, sure.
Yeah,
Okay, but this,
customer standpoint, prod and dev should not be in same cluster. So
right.
they should, as per the best practice, they will maintain for separate isolated cluster environments with multiple worker nodes.
Maybe
Yeah,
apart from production, we can have the same cluster for all the test environment, but
Yeah,
not
dev
you
and UAT, yeah, you can.
production for the example.
So, but question is this, Sundar, why you need, let's say you have a different production environment. One is for HR production, one is for finance production, one for marketing production, or maybe, so multiple productions environment you have. So you need to create a separate cluster for each production workload. That's what you were saying?
No, I don't think we
No,
should have
not
multiple.
No, I think
exactly.
he got confused between the environment types. We mentioned dev and prod, so he thought of, and logically it makes no sense to have dev and prod type of environments on the same cluster. So he was coming from that point of view. I think it now clears that it cannot, I mean, it can be anything. It can be based on your namespaces like HR, finance, or marketing, or payments, or whatever.
Okay, so let me comment on this one, guys. It is normally, ideally, you should not have a multiple clusters to maintain. Okay, even though if it is a customer or production or development as well, you have to have only one cluster because we are maintaining a high availability there. We are having a multiple worker nodes. Why should you have one more Kubernetes cluster for that one? All right, so you can create a separate environment. See, guys, I can write and it is very simple. It is simple that I can run multiple applications on one physical box as well, right? And I can isolate them by putting a appropriate security inside that. I will make sure that I will write a rule that the pods inside this namespace will not be able to talk to the pods inside this namespace. Only one-liner statement will isolate the network.
How?
Right? So that is what we are going to do it.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So let me take the now some questions. If you want to talk to another secret server, for example, CyberArk, for getting the credential checking, is that as the required additional customization? Secrets are stored in the Kubernetes cluster. That is one thing. In the Kubernetes.
Technically speaking, some of the applications, they want to maintain all the passwords in a separate server. If you want to communicate with that at the time of running the applications, that requires some additional. I think it should require some additional customization, like some shell script will be talking to the CyberArk, getting the credentials, passing that to the Kubernetes, and then we need to run the applications.
The reason I am thinking about is that everything is in the etcd cluster, etcd database. So if you then you need to write a customization inside the etcd module saying that for the secrets, please go to this database, and for something else, this database. Then you need to do some additional configuration over there.
Okay.
Can we pass some environmental variables parameters to YAML file? Yes, we can pass, Rishi. But that we are going to see in the config maps.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Role binding is for assigning role to user. Yes, correct, Viven. Yeah, thank you, Rishi. Yes, role binding is for assigning a role to user. Absolutely. And in Kubernetes world, it is called as a subject. In the YAML file, we call users as a subjects. No, that is what we have discussed, Vivek, right? We cannot refer pod as subject, but if at all you want to use a username as a pod, then you can use it. But otherwise, as a pod terminology, you cannot use it. Okay. Venkatesh is asking, user Gene will have access to all pods which are created in namespace development. Correct, Venkatesh. It will have access to all the pods which are created in the namespace called as development. Yes. It cannot see the pods from the another namespaces. Thank you, guys. So this is something about the role and role bindings. Now, moving forward, we would like to discuss about the another stuff. Let me see if anything is left out from this one. So that. So.
Mesh, one small. See, we may have multiple namespaces, and in multiple namespaces, we have different pods. As we discussed till now, one pod can once you log in into one pod, and you can ping the other pod as well. Apart from this, can we do anything? Just apart from just pinging the other pod?
No,
because
if you
we
have
are discussing.
Yeah, if you are able to ping, and if
because
you have.
Yeah. Go ahead.
See, there are three protocols that we can follow: TCP, UDP, and ICMP. If ICMP is allowed, okay, you will be able to access. And if the TCP is allowed, like SSH is allowed, or some anything is, let's say some other, let's say FTP is allowed. I'm just giving the example. You will be able to do that one. You will be able to do the SSH to that pod. All right, and if you UDP is allowed, you will be able to. If it is a DNS server or kind of stuff in the DNS or DSCP, that pod is. that other pods will get information from them.
Okay. By default, all these UDP, TCP, everything will be by default. It will be available in pod. I mean, no, right?
Yeah, basically it is using the namespace and network space from the native operating system. So this will be there. This will be there because it is not restricted. No firewall is there in between of them. So there will be access to each and everything. Only thing is that SSH should be enabled on the pod 1 if you are trying to access from the pod 2. If that service is enabled, then you will be able to access. If service is not enabled, then you will not be able to access.
Yeah, that's what SSH by default it won't be enabled, right? By
Yeah,
default.
mostly it won't be. By default,
Yeah.
mostly it won't, because
Then,
normally pods are coming with normal stuffs, right? Ping command or normal stuff. Otherwise, I don't think so. It will be available.
yeah,
Unless,
during our exercise, can we check like 2-3 commands what we can do apart
yes,
from
yes,
ping?
we can do that. Definitely, we can do it. Yeah. So we have discussed
Okay,
about
thank
this, guys. Yeah, thank you. RBAC, determine or create a namespace, create certificate credentials for user. That we have done, guys, now. Okay. And I just check it if anything is left out. Role and role binding we have seen. So role is a set of rules that represent a set of purely additive permissions. Role is used to grant access to resources within the single namespace. Role binding binds the permissions defined in a role to users. This we have seen, guys. Yeah, who and what. This is a diagrammatically you can see. So some resources, other resources, role which has actions, allow access, don't allow access. Right, correct, guys. And this is a user group. You can create a service account or you can create a users, and you can bind the role with the role binding. This is what, and we have seen in detail, guys. I hope that this diagram is clear to you. What is a cluster role and role binding? So cluster role is a role which has a cluster role wide scope, and it can also use to grant access to define permissions on namespaces, be granted within individual namespaces or across all namespaces, or as well as we can define permission on cluster scope resources as well. And similarly, there is a cluster role binding for which user you want to create a cluster role and you want to bind that with it. So we can do that with the help of cluster role binding. Okay, guys, so this is something about the role and role binding, and now we want to move to the network security. Okay, similarly, guys, Sonal is asking if we have master worker nodes kind of setup, then can the pods can talk to each other having the same namespace? Yes, yes, they can talk to each other, Sonali.
Okay.
Even in the same namespace as well as from the different namespace.
Even the different namespace, they can talk to each other.
They can talk to each other. Yes. Visibility is not there, but they can talk to each other.
Okay.
Okay. By default, we don't get SSH. Yes, Venkatesh, correct. We have to install the package otherwise. But in some cases, somebody might have used SSH installation, and if that is already available, then we can access it. Yeah, that is case to
A question on this pod. You said that we can communicate, right? So while creating a pod, we can mention the network, right? Our custom network. So if there are in two different subnets, they cannot talk to each other, right? Even they are in the same cluster. Is that correct?
So basically, when we are defining the API server or defining the Kubernetes cluster, that time we are using a /16 network, and that network gets spread across all the worker nodes across all namespaces. So even if you have a different subnets, it will be part of the same supernetting. You can see that it is kind of supernetting. So they will talk to each other.
Okay. So the only way we can restrict them is through network security policy, which you're telling
Right.
now. Okay.
Right. Correct. Yeah. No, service account is not assigned to pod, Vivek. It is assigned to the resources such as, yeah, basically, now this is an interesting question you have asked, whether it is application pod or system pod, Vivek. Right. So for application pod, if certain things need to be required to perform from the kubectl or maybe sorry, maybe from the kube proxy, then there will be service account required for that. You can see service accounts across the namespaces here. Kubectl get service account. So for the default namespace, it is showing default one. But if I see here in the kube system, let me see here. Look at this. There are a lot of service accounts created for the kube system. And kube system holds the pods which are system pods. Right? But application pod, if you see, right now I have a default namespace called as a, this is the namespace called as a default. So how many service accounts are available for this one? Only one. How many service accounts are available for development? Only one. So if I create any pod inside this one, it will have only one service account. And what the service account contains? Service account called as a default. So it is a cluster level service account. So it is just using a mountable secrets, right? Nothing else. Yeah, and we can create a custom service account. Yes, we can create it. There is no big deal in that one. So let me just show you that quickly. Guys, I need to refer the kubernetes.io because I don't have immediate YAML file created with me. Kubernetes.io and service account.
It was a good question asked by Vivek. So yeah, because this is like in training it's okay, like what we are doing, but in a live scenario, this is what we'll be doing. A custom account creation will be done.
Right. Yeah, sure. No, I should have one service account YAML. So this is simple one. API version is one, service account is this one, and so use multiple service accounts. Okay. Can I let me create this one? This is simple service account, just to having a metadata, nothing else is there. So let's try out this one.
Ramesh, before that, I would suggest, if I don't know how much time we have, but just to get better understanding of security, if we can just create a whiteboard structure and try to put everything together what we are trying to accomplish with custom scenario, and then we can deploy that using YAML.
Now, first of all, let me try to understand. Let me show you how to deploy the service account. Service account is basically used to talk to from one service to another service. That's it. Okay, it doesn't come inside the security. There will be a kind of stuff, but service account is just a user we are creating for the processes, for the system pods or any pod. I'm just creating one service account. That means I'm just creating one user. So let me create one user. How to create a user? That's why I'm showing you. Oh, this is a secret actually, got it. So how to create a service account? This is my service account. Okay, and what is the name you want to give to the service account? Let's say this is my test one. And if at all you want to give any annotation, that's fine. And let me remove that service. This is the only definition of the service account. That we are creating a user in the system, which will be used as a service account. kubectl apply -f sa1.yaml. So kubectl get service account. So can you see? I have a test one as a service account. Now, if I use a role binding here, definition. So we have used role binding, right? So first of all, let me see. We have used one role, and this role is called as a developer, right? And this is development. So I'm going to use the same role for the service account. So where I can specify? I can specify in the role binding. So vi role binding dot YAML. And what is your subject? Kind is here service account. Let me just create a copy of this role bind service account role bind vi .yaml, right? And this is, I'm going to change this one as a role binding is my test one, and we are going to deploy this to the development part, right? And what is subject? Subject is your service account. I hope that this is written like this. And what is the name of the service account? Test one. And which role you would like to assign? This one. That's it. So if I try to save this.
1 second, Ramesh. I understand that in this scenario, we are just talking about one role of Gene. But in real lifetime scenario, if we are the admins, then we would need like multiple roles. How do we do? Would we like put an array of accounts or something like that?
We can create a different role references. You will be, let's say 100 of roles are there, and out of the 2 roles you want to assign it to this particular service account.
Okay.
So you can use multiple times here.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So let me see if this works, guys. Apply -f sa role bind.yaml. So it has created. Now my SA user, test one user, which is my service account now, has been attached to the role called as a test one. So kubectl describe role binding. I hope that this works. Test one. Yeah, it is there inside this development namespace. This is service account created and mapped to the role called as a developer. This is the way we have to do it. No, there is no problem in using a default service account. No problem at all. So it is attached to the default namespace or any other namespace. You can attach the default service account. You use, let's say if I create a namespace called as, let's say Vada Pav, and in this namespace also default service account has been attached now. Service account has got attached. You can see kubectl get service account from the namespace called as a Vada Pav. Default is there. It gets automatically attached.
So this service account is at namespace level or at a maybe it's on a deployment level. I mean, I'm trying to understand if we want to have a deployment kind service. Can we assign this service account to that deployment specific or replica set, or it's a cluster level, or it's a namespace level?
No. The service account is basically user, and you can assign a user to specific namespace. So the similar way what we have created a genes, right? We can use the SA also, service account also.
So I'm trying to understand the value. I mean, the practical value of the service account, where we have to use this on practical scenario.
The practical scenario, we have to use the service account between communicating between the two different pods which
So
are inside the kube system.
that is what I was trying to understand, right? To communicating between two pods. Now, since in Kubernetes, each pod can talk to any pod, right? But let's say I have some kind of restriction. I don't know how I can apply that, deny this access, deny that no pod can talk to any pod. Now we have to use a service account for communication between pods. That's what I'm trying to understanding. That's how I want to try to understand the more custom level networking security.
See, basically, service account is a kind of user which is used to access the namespace, not a pod, right? So basically, it is a namespace level, this one. And what activity or roles you want to apply for that namespace, whether you want to access the pod from that namespace, whether you want to access the deployment from that namespace, or whether you want to access something called as secrets from that namespace, you can use that service account. You can restrict that user or service account being from accessing the all the resources or all resources in the deployment, in the namespace level. So it can be deployment, it can be pod, it can be anything.
Just to add, Vivek, there can be a processes in your container that requires to contact to API server, and that's when actually this service account will be used, because when we communicate to API server, we manually give the command and pass the access. But there could be scenarios when you are writing something in your pod or your container that requires to contact to API server. I think that's the place where service account is used.
You mean to run the jobs, certain jobs,
Yeah,
and
it
those
can be
jobs
anything.
only.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
No,
Like,
see guys, if any user has given one YAML file saying that deploy the 4 pods, okay. So now API server want to talk to the etcd as well as kube scheduler, right? So now how API server pod will talk to the kube scheduler? So it will generate one token. But how this token will communicate between these API servers as well, API server and kube scheduler, right? There should be some user which will talk to the another pod, which is a system level pod. So that time service account comes into picture. That time normal user will not be used in the default scenario. Are you getting it?
repeat that, Ramesh.
Okay. So consider this is your master node, and in this master node you have an API server here. This is actually pod, right? And then you have a kube scheduler. And then you have something called as etcd also. These are basically pods, right?
So they are
Now
communicating using service account.
yes, that is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So now let's say you have written a now you have given a YAML file here to the API server and asked to create a 4 pods. So to take a decision, API server need a kube scheduler as well as need to talk to the etcd. So how this API server will talk to the kube scheduler? So you need some user to talk to each other, right? And that is being used as a service. Okay, and so to talk to your API server, you need to have one user, and that is nothing but your normal user, like Gene user, Dan
I
user.
got it. We don't need to create a multiple user in each pods, right? To give the access. Basically, service account is more better way to communicate.
Manage it. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
I hope that service account is now clear picture from everybody's mind. I can spend 5 more minutes if you have not understood the service account, guys. But this is important.
Yeah, one more
If I
time.
have,
Small part.
Otherwise, at
if
the
I
end
have,
of the training program, if you go for the interview and somebody ask you, what is the difference between user and service account? What answer we
so
will
yeah,
give?
Ramesh, which means like if we have multiple API servers, so we can use same service account for the same kube scheduler and etcd.
You will have only one API server always.
Okay.
You can have
Oh
multiple
yeah,
pods. You'll have one API
correct.
server.
Yeah, I missed it that class.
Okay.
That's why I forgot. Correct. API server is only one.
Okay, right, because it is a pod, it is static pod. You cannot create a deployment also out of it. I hope that I am
That
saying
sits in
correct.
master node, API server.
Yeah, see here, it is in master. I just shown you we have logged in inside it also, right? This is a pod.
Correct.
This is not a deployment. And if you see the deployments are only couple of them. kubectl gate. One is I think view will be there, and another one is DNS kube system, kube test system. Yeah, DNS and metric servers, not view network also. This is also not a deployment. It is a pod, purely pod. So if it is a pod, then it is you cannot just you cannot increase the number of the pods. But if it is a deployment, then you can increase it. I am just answering your question that how many API servers are there in the master role. So you have only one API server.
One, correct. Got it. Thanks.
Right. So if you want to talk to this, let's say that guys, if you want to talk to API server will talk to the etcd master. API server will talk to the kube controller, maybe. API server will talk to the, let's say, core DNS, or API server want to talk to the kube scheduler. So when API server or kube scheduler want to talk to the vice versa, right? So if these system pods want to talk to each other for their internal functions, that time service accounts will be used. So service account is a kind of user which is used for communication between the system pods or system applications. You can say like that.
Ramesh,
Yeah.
here one question. Sorry. Okay, generally, as per our, I mean, any enterprise, right? Whenever we install the services, I mean, the system services, we use the standard service account also we define as per the enterprise standard, security standard.
Right.
So while we deploy the Kubernetes, can we specify the service account for the integration API versus other services, or will it be a default one, whatever it comes with Kubernetes?
You can customize that. You can customize.
Oh, okay. How
This
do
is a
we
pod,
do that?
right? This is a pod, right? Get the YAML file of it. How to get the YAML file of it?
Describe
YAML file. kubectl get pod called as the kube API server. Can I use -o YAML? This is your YAML file for the API server. Modify it.
Oh, okay. But before we run this, we'll have to ensure that the service account is already available in the network so that the Kubernetes service can access that service account.
Right. By default, it is required because service
Okay.
accounts are created when we create the install the.
Yeah, got it.
Right?
Got it. Because we generally use some integration layer, right? Either if it is a Red Hat IDM is the centralized solution which we use that will integrate with the Active Directory, or we use a Quest or any third party which we use to integrate with Active Directory. So basically, we'll have to have the account already provisioned on the AD or any other tool. Okay.
Correct. Absolutely. I hope that this is clear now, guys, to each and every one of you.
Yes.
Yes, you can take out the YAML file from this pod and try to read it. It's beautiful. You will be able to understand many things, guys, out of it. Superb. Very nice.
Ramesh, do you see that it's using a which service, a default service account in this YAML file?
I have not checked it. Which it will be using the. I think there are a lot of service accounts are there at the kube system level. So have you seen anywhere this service account is created in this one? Because I was trying to search that only. Which service account is there?
You can just do a command grep command.
Yeah, that is, no, but the grep command only gives the information one liner. Okay. Nothing is there. So it might have this, it is separate YAML file, kubectl get service account or SA from the kube system. And you have plenty of them. Now we have to see which one is used for which one. That we have to see now. I think here there will be API server as well. See, lot of service accounts are there. Now there is a service account for the controller. This is for certificate controller. This is for cluster role, core DNS. So similarly, I think we need to check it for the API servers. This is for kube proxy. This
I
is
think
for the
API server might be using all the service account because that is the main, media.
Yeah, right, correct. So let me just open any one service account and check it what is there inside it. kubectl describe. I will do this way: get service account called as a metric test server hyphen from the kube system hyphen o YAML. Okay, now you can see here. This is service account, and it is using a name is service metrics, namespace is kube system. It is giving some other link, self link is there, and it is used for the secrets. To check the secrets, it is using this secret actually to communicate. This token is there. So if any other service account or any other process want to talk to the metric server, then it will use this token for the communication. Yes, it might be using all the service accounts. Okay, but we need to go into the detail of this one to find out exactly which service account is associated with the which one, right? But ideally, it seems like that all the services might be using all the service accounts sometime or later. Okay. All right, guys. Hope now service account is clear to each and every one of you. Venkatesh, it is clear now.
Yeah, so to some extent it's clear, Ramesh.
Okay. Sonali has given a definition of service account inside the chat. So service account is used to authenticate machine level processes to get access to our Kubernetes cluster. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonali.
So let's.
Thank you.
So guys, we have discussed a lot about the service accounts as well as role and role bindings. Now let's move ahead with the another topic called as a network security. Okay. You can see the second point here. By default, pods are non-isolated. They accept traffic from any source. So that is what we were discussing since last 1 hour. Network policies are a namespace resource. This is important. It is a namespace resource. We create policy for each namespace. And what network policy use? It use the labels of the any pod or namespace to define the rules whether the traffic should be allowed or not. So here network policy works on the work on the labels, that is selector and labeling. If no network policies apply to pod, then all network connections to and from it are permitted, right? So if network policies are absent, everybody will talk to each other. But if any network policy is attached to pod, that pod will reject any connections that are not allowed by any network policy. So by default, all will get rejected once you apply the network policy. Whatever the rule is applied, that is only accepted. All other rules will be rejected. So pods are isolated if at least one network policy applies to them. If no policies apply, then are non-isolated. At least one policy should be applied so that much connectivity will be happen. Then all the rules will be by default will be rejected rules. So what is the meaning of that? I hope that guys, everybody has come out of this service account now. Let's move ahead with the network security. Yes, Sonali, I hope that everything is clear now.
Yes, yes.
Otherwise, you will, if you go in, if you stick to that particular point, then probably you will miss something out of this network security. So guys, please, requesting you. Yes, Vivek? All right.
So Ramesh, here the basic question is, for example, if I don't set up any network policies, if you go back to the definition to the other screen that you're having, so by the second point, they accept traffic from any source. But if I have my network security as saying that no, I'm going to deny the traffic from any source, then it is totally isolated, right? Is that what
Yes, it becomes isolated, completely isolated.
So
that
it
is
will
what
be
I want.
accessible only to the particular machine who are logged into that particular machine.
Correct. So let's say that I'll just explain you in simple language now. So this is my pod 1, this is my pod 2, let's say. This is on the different namespace. Hey, how many ports are available on the pod 1? How many network ports are available on the pod 1? Any idea? 65,536, right? How many ports are open for this also? 65,536. So these many ports are there. So we talk on the ports, right, guys, from one machine to another machine. So communication happens on the ports, right? So when we don't define any network policy, if there is no network policy defined, if network policy is absent here, then all these ports will talk to all these ports. If that services are running on that ports, only then. If the services are not running on that port, then they, by default, they are in the rejected mode. So if you don't have SSH, the 22 number port will not be working. It is deactivated. Okay, so now what I have written here as a one network security policy is written that please accept 22 number connection from this pod 1 to this pod 2 from the by using some label. Only one rule is applied. If you apply only one rule between this pod 1 and pod 2, I'm just giving you an example, guys, to understand what is the meaning of isolation and non-isolation. So moment you give the only one policy, right, then all other policies or all other communication will be by default rejected. Only one communication will be active, all other will be deactivated. So if you say that in the pod that this pod 2 says that I should get the traffic from only from the pod 1. If you write that network policies, then all other pod 2s from the same namespace will not be able to talk to this one. Okay, so what is isolation? If there is no network security policy applied, then everybody is talking to each other. If there is no network policy defined in between the pod 1 and pod 2, so pod 1 and pod 2 are talking to each other whatever the ports are available. It is completely non-isolated. But the moment you write one network policy with one rule itself that only I want to get access from this machine, that time whatever the pods are there, then they will not be able to access this pod, but only this pod will be able to access. So in short, by default, all other rules will get in the rejected mode. Only one rule will be in the allowed mode. That is what the default behavior of the network security inside the Kubernetes cluster namespaces. And it is similar kind of firewall kind of stuff, right? Security group in the AWS or security group inside the Azure. So if you don't want to allow one service to talk to another service, you can use like this one. Okay. So this is something about the network security. I hope that you understood what is the meaning of this statement. Network policy use the label. By default, pods are non-isolated. They accept traffic from any source. And you see this one. If no network policies apply to a pod, then all network connections to and from it are permitted. Once network policy is attached to a pod, that pod will reject any connections that are not allowed by any network policy. Right? So by default, all other connections will be rejected. If there is any other network policy, it will follow. But if other than that, it will just reject all the connections that are not allowed by any network policy. Is this clear now? Every one of you, thank you guys.
Ramesh, one thing, as you told, like if we have 65,536 port numbers in different namespaces, okay.
No, in a pod,
if the
in a pod, we have that many ports. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But in different namespace, we may have the same port number.
Yes.
Which is available.
Yes. For every pod have 0 to 65,536. 1 to 65,000. 1, not from
Yeah.
0, it is from 1. Yeah.
Right. Think that if we have 3 namespaces A, B, C, and A is trying to access a port number. I mean, like if we have provided a network policy saying this is the port number. B is also having example 8080 port number, and C is also having 8080 port number. But which one it will pick up?
No, basically, first of all, this network security policy is on the label based. Not
Okay.
It is not going boil down to the port numbers.
Okay, then yeah, that's enough. Thank you.
Okay, guys. So let me see if okay. So I think these are some of the configurations that we want to see. But do we have a time left? Or no, we don't have a time. So guys, in the next session, we'll cover this network security in detail. We have discussed about the network security. I just want to show you the practical stuff. So that we'll see in the next session. So network security and config.
Can you provide the documentation bucket link?
Documentation bucket link. Which documentation? On the K2-1 portal?
Yes, network security. You have a document, right?
Right. Yes. Yes, Piyush, you can please upload that one on the. I think it is available, right, on the portal.
Yes,
it is available. Yes,
it is available on self portal.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
David, could you share the link, please? Because I am not able to find this document on the portal.
Sure. When I'll upload the today's session, I'll also share the self link portal also for this PPT.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, guys. I hope that we tried to discuss about the RBAC today. We discussed about the multiple stuffs, but in the next session we'll be covering the network security context, and config maps. All right, guys. We were able to just complete one topic today, 2 topics rather than that, right? One is our RBAC, and the other one was that one. What is it? Authentication mechanism, right? How to create a context. Yeah. I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Have a nice time ahead. See you in the next session.
But a little bit complicated going down the line. But yes, nice session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ramesh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, stop recording.
Last line number you pasted, Ramesh. From 1304 onwards and down.
1304, na? Okay, one
Yes.
second.
Thank you.
All right, welcome. One 1340. One 1366. Yes, I have sent all the. Yeah, you can stop the recording now. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and take care of yourself. Bye bye.